I was unemployed and decided to take the leap, which was very frightening because I didn't really know the first thing about running a law firm. Why would you ever want to continue to personally guarantee the obligations of someone you sold your business to who may or may not continue to pay rent? I mean, what are your rights if they don't pay rent? Now you've got to go after them, and that's a lawsuit. Do you know that a buyer, in many states in the country, a buyer on a resale can be responsible for the unpaid state taxes of the seller?
Welcome to the Zero to Profitable Franchise Podcast, the best place for you to come to figure out the right franchise to buy and how to get and stay profitable. My name is Tariq Johnson, and I've bought, grown, and sold multiple franchises and got myself free from corporate America, and now I'm on a mission to help you do that too. Here you'll find some of the most in-depth profitable franchise secrets, tangible strategies, and specific mindsets to help you create your dream life through franchising. How would you like to save tens of thousands of dollars and make sure you protect yourself and your investment when buying and opening your franchise business? It's a no-brainer, right? That's exactly why this is a must-watch episode. I talk with Nancy Lenard, who is a franchise-specific attorney, and we talk about all of the legal do's and don'ts when buying and opening your franchise. And don't worry, we made the episode easy to understand. It's actually a really fun episode. We talk about FDDs, which means franchise disclosure document if you're new to this, franchise agreements, negotiating leases, and all of the really important things that you need to know to protect your investment and your wealth. So drop us a comment and let us know what's your biggest takeaway as you watch. Now, if you want to buy a franchise in the next 12 months, then I'm going to give you for free my Profitable Franchise Formula Masterclass. This is some of my secret sauce that I only share with my clients. You get access to it for free. So go grab your copy of the Masterclass at buyaprofitablefranchise.com. We've also helped many clients buy franchises, get them profitable, or buy resale businesses that are thriving. I'm talking highly profitable resales, great value, and have allowed many of our clients to actually quit their job right away and replace their income immediately. So if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise or resale business, then you can go to tariqjohnson.com/consulting, and we're happy to see if we can help. With that said, let's jump into episode number 21 of the Zero to Profitable Franchise Podcast. Hey, before we jump into the episode, if you've gotten value from any of the content I put out, it's not easy and it really takes a lot of time to create this content. So if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button and drop a comment, anything, even a smiley face. It helps the YouTube algorithm show the episode to more and more people. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, please rate and drop a quick review. Both of these things are free and take no longer than 30 seconds. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to podcast episode number 21, and I'm here with Nancy Lenard, and she is a franchise attorney, so this is going to be, I'm excited for this. This is going to be a fun topic. Nancy, welcome, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much, Tariq. I'm excited too.
Yeah, awesome. You know, I think what would be interesting to talk about first is the fact that, okay, so you have your own law firm and you help people that are buying franchises and franchisees. But what's cool is that, you know, you made the leap yourself from being an employee to starting your own business. And I know that you didn't necessarily do it out of choice. So would you mind just kind of sharing that story real quick? Because I think people would relate to it.
Yeah, I've actually started 3 law firms. So the first one was the one you're referring to. So I was an in-house attorney for Nutrisystem when they had 1,800 franchised and corporate locations around the U.S. They were the number 1 weight loss company in the United States, and 1,300 of those 1,800 were franchised. And unfortunately, they went into bankruptcy, and I'm going to apologize if I get raspy at tail end of a cold. And they went into bankruptcy, and I had been busy for the prior 6 months laying off all of my friends with great severance packages, but sadly laying them off. And I worked till the last day that the company existed, and I was unemployed. So, and I didn't even get paid the last week I worked. So I was there trying to figure out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. I had never actually worked for a law firm. I always had been in-house for corporations, large corporations, and decided to take the leap, which was very frightening because I didn't really know the first thing about running a law firm. And I grew that firm to 6 lawyers, and then started another firm with 2 other people, and we grew that firm to 14 attorneys. And I left there after a few years. It didn't really work out well, and I started all over again with the third firm, and that's the current iteration. And we have 6 lawyers.
Wow. What an amazing story. So, I love this because what that says is when you and your firm are advising people that are buying franchises and they're putting their life savings on the line to buy a franchise, you know what they're going through. Like, you know the emotions and you know the fear that they're experiencing. It's not like you're some, random person that just works for a company and like don't know what it's like.
No, I know exactly what it's like. And I know what it's like to lose a job and feel very insecure and scared about where you're going, and to take that leap into something that's so completely unknown to you of starting a business. I absolutely understand it because I've been there and I've done that. And I've done it more than once. So, because when I left the second firm, I was starting all over again. And, again, it's very, very scary.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm glad that we got connected. And just for everyone listening out there, so one of the clients that is in my program and that works with us started working with Nancy, found Nancy somehow, and then suggested that we connect, and we did, and it was great. I really enjoyed connecting with you, and then now you're working with another one of our clients who's buying a resale. Ironically, his name is Tariq as well,
Yes.
which is funny. And he's had good things to say as well. So let's dive into to kind of the legal side of things. So can you just explain what it is that you and your firm do?
So we only represent franchisees, which is unusual. That's a very, I don't know too many other law firms that do what we do. There are other firms that represent just franchisees, but they tend to be litigators. We are a transactional firm, meaning we don't go into court and we don't file suit. We don't defend lawsuits. We handle contracts and review and negotiation of contracts. So with that said, what we do is we help franchisees evaluate the franchise documents, and we do that on a flat fee basis. We help set up their entity if that's needed, and we do that on a flat fee basis. And we help with commercial leases, and that's also on a flat fee basis. We also do resales of franchises, acquisitions and sales of them. That's not that's hourly, that's not flat fee. And all of those services are nationwide. I have attorneys licensed in multiple states, but it's primarily federal law that applies to a franchise, so we do all of that nationwide. So those are the basic services that we perform, and that's pretty much our entire firm's practice. And that's
Yeah,
unusual.
that's amazing.
Yeah, because most firms that
Yeah,
handle franchisee transactional work also handle franchisor work. And we found that we
yeah.
had too many conflicts of interest. So we made a conscious decision about 6 years ago not to represent franchisors any longer.
That's really great. And I have an interesting story from a legal perspective to share, which is, so when my wife and I signed our first franchise agreement, we were looking at our lease, and it was a brand new shopping center. So when we were signing our lease, it was a dirt lot. I mean, just there was no irrigation, no underground piping, nothing. I mean, just a dirt lot with a bunch of brush in it. And so it took a long time from when we signed our franchise agreement. We didn't open until I think 2.5 years later. And even I think it was 2 years when we signed our lease. But my wife and I had negotiated a lot of the main points of the lease already. And the franchisor said, hey, you should really hire an attorney to review the lease. And my wife and I were like, at that point, that specific attorney, I think it was like $3,500. It was like a flat fee basis or something like that. And this was a few years ago. This was many years ago, actually. This was 7 years ago.
That was a lot 7 years
And
ago. That was way higher than we were charging 7 years ago, but
oh, wow. Okay.
in
Well,
the ballpark
good
of
to
what we're
know.
charging today.
Well, this was California. So everything's more expensive in California.
I have one of my attorneys is licensed in California, and we do a lot of California leases at
Got it.
less than what you probably would pay today for that.
Yeah. Well, I wish we would have known each other 7 years
I
ago.
know.
So to make a long story longer, basically, so we wind up hiring the attorney reluctantly, and that $3,500 investment is what I would call it, wind up saving us over $30,000 just because of one or two sentences that were changed that wind up protecting us. So I'm a firm believer in hiring attorneys throughout all aspects of the process. But can you kind of talk about why you feel like it's so important, and maybe some of the common things that you see that are kind of sneaky that you're able to help your clients with without giving away your secret sauce?
Well, we'll start with the lease because you mentioned about your experience with the lease. We charge a flat fee, not much more than what you paid 7 years ago. And I will tell you that we're the recommended law firm for many franchise systems. Many brands recommend us to their franchisees for the leases. So they're heavily negotiable. And a lot of people don't understand. They think the franchisor, because they put them in touch with their local realtor or broker to negotiate the business terms, that's pretty much all they need to worry about. And you were very wise to not just have that, not just worry about the negotiations that you had accomplished, which probably were great, but that's probably the business terms. There's everything else. So we add reps and warranties from the landlord. And one that's very important is, for example, if you're in a retail business, you need to be able to accommodate anyone with disabilities or anything else. And so having a representation and warranty, for example, from the landlord for Americans with Disability Act compliance is quite important, because if somebody's trying to come in a wheelchair or on crutches and there aren't enough handicap parking spots, or the curb is too steep, they could very well sue you under Americans with Disability Act, and having that representation and warranty from the landlord could help with that. And that could be a lot of money. We soften the remedies that the franchisee/tenant would certainly encounter. And Pennsylvania, we do leases in almost every state in the country. I can tell you Pennsylvania has the worst lease for a tenant in the entire country. So here where I'm based out of, we actually have the worst, because we still have a clause in it, our leases, that's perfectly legal and not available, you don't see it in any lease elsewhere, called a confession of judgment clause. That says if you're in default and they've given you the notice and opportunity to cure the default that's required by the lease, that they can just go into court without your right to defend yourself, because you've already signed that lease with that confession of judgment clause in it for rent, and they get a judgment against you. Well, that's ridiculous and unfair, and there's loads of other remedies, so we take a very heavy hand in negotiating that, and that's very typical in Pennsylvania, but not elsewhere. But other things that we negotiate, personal guarantee, which is where you're putting your personal assets on the line to guarantee the financial obligations under the lease. We have lots of ways to limit that. They definitely should be limited. And then making sure, of course, that the franchisor's requirements are incorporated into the lease, the collateral assignment or whatever other documents they require be part of the lease. There always is a lease writer that franchisors require. Another really critical point that most people would not be thinking about, and that is down the road when you're ready to sell the business, what is the right to assign that lease if you want to sell the business? Can the landlord block that? And it happens all the time. We do a lot of resales, as you're aware. And I can tell you, landlords, if we haven't handled that lease, landlords can totally blow a deal. They can delay a deal. I saw one delayed 6 months because the landlord made the buyer go through all kinds of hoops to be approved. And we didn't handle those leases initially for that client. So, and one other deal that he had fell apart because the landlord didn't agree to the buyer. In a shopping center kind of setting, a landlord often has relocation clauses, which says that they can relocate you. So maybe you have a 1,500 or 2,000 square foot space, and next to you has another 1,500 or 2,000, and they have this great tenant coming in who wants 3,000 or 4,000 square feet. They want to take you to these two tenants and move them somewhere else in the shopping center. Well, first of all, where they move you could be horrible. Could be way less accessibility, visibility. they may pay for the move, but what about the cost of the build out, signage, and everything else that's involved? And what about if you're seasonal and they want to move you during the season? That's your, time of the year that's most, most of your customers are there. So, what if they want to move you during Christmas week and, you're dependent on Christmas traffic for your retail business? That's truly the tip of the iceberg. I am not giving away the store by saying this. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and none of those are business negotiations. Those are all legal negotiations. And so, negotiating the rent, square footage, the common area charges, tenant improvement and allowance, which is money towards the build out, term, renewal term and rent, all those kinds of things the broker will get involved in because that's very local. We get involved in everything else, and we heavily redline a lease, pretty much every section of a lease. And there's so many more things. And you talked about new construction. That's a huge, entire other topic that we could have a whole session on, because there's so many issues in a new construction that you have to be aware of and have to address legally in that lease.
Yeah. And it's interesting now, having done this myself, having been a multi-unit franchisee now, and now because we help so many clients on my side, and a lot of them share their leases and stuff like that, just sharing learning lessons. And it's I wish I knew more than I did years ago. And I think it's what's even more important is that having an attorney that specializes in franchises and franchising, because there are different nuances. And what's interesting is you pointed out two things, which were, number one, personal guarantee, number two, an assignment. And so two quick stories. Story number one is, personal guarantee. When we sold our store in California, our personal guarantee, my wife and I's, transferred to the new owner. So we're still on the hook.
No, that's
if he doesn't pay his lease,
and you know what,
we're still on the hook.
Your attorney didn't do you a great service in that, because that's something to me that's basically the one and only drop dead issue in a lease is that. Because why would you ever want to continue to personally guarantee the obligations of someone you sold your business to, who may or may not continue to pay rent? I mean, what are your rights if they don't pay rent? Now you've got to go after them, and that's a lawsuit.
Don't dig in too deep, because you're going to give me an anxiety
attack. I'm sorry. But it is the one issue that I do. If you can't get the landlord to agree to release it in the negotiations initially up front, I do often say that maybe this is something you can't live with, and unless it's the best space out there for your business, why would you agree to that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, no, we didn't know what we didn't know.
I say that you don't know what you don't, and especially with the franchise agreement. So yeah, you don't know what you don't know, which is why we represent many, many attorneys, because even other attorneys don't know this area of law, don't know. I published an article that was in the American Bar Association's Franchise Journal on the 10 most important things for an attorney representing a franchisee/tenant in a retail lease to know and look at. And trust me, that's one of them. Personal guarantee is a huge issue.
So it's so important. And then the other one was assignment. Now, this was with our other store. So we bought a resale in another state, in Florida, with the same brand. And so when they assigned the lease, I'm being exposed with all the mistakes that I've made. And this is, it's funny because sometimes people reach out and they think I have the answers to everything because I have this franchise channel, and I'm very honest about saying, look, part of why I have this channel is to share the mistakes I've made. So you guys, the listeners, you get to benefit from the mistakes that I've made.
Tariq, you can call this legal therapy. How's that?
Yeah. Perfect. But so we didn't have an attorney review when we did the lease assignment and took over the store. And one thing that I didn't even realize was that the lease that we took over, that got assigned to us, the options to renew were voided upon assignment. So when we went to renew our lease, Regency, the landlord that's a pain in the butt,
They're a tough landlord, no question.
they were like, oh yeah, by the way, you cannot use that option because it actually was voided when you took over the lease. So we got to write a whole new lease. And so, then that 3% escalation that might have been protecting us, now it goes to rent that is market rate. So those are two huge mistakes that we made. And in both situations, if we would have hired the right attorney the first time and then hired one for the Florida store, we could have avoided it.
Yeah. Sorry about that. That's a shame, though. I do recommend. It's definitely worth, at least I can't speak for other law firms, but I know our fees are very reasonable. Our fees are, and I think it's well worth it. For resale, it's critical because there's so many things. The laws are changing in state by state for resales of franchises or business acquisition at all. Did you know that a buyer in many states in the country, a buyer on a resale can be responsible for the unpaid state taxes of the seller? Right. This is why you need an attorney. And that's true in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. It's true in California. It's true in many, many states. And there's ways to get around that. And that's by getting a tax clearance letter from the state. And that can take sometimes weeks or months, and it won't hold up the closing. What happens is you have to escrow the funds that were prior year's taxes to be cleared of it. But there's so many things that the average person wouldn't know. And this is why it's important. And that's why we have a very niche practice. This is what we focus in on. For the very purpose that we can stay on top of these laws that are changing, and more and more and more states are starting to have that law. That Pennsylvania, it's brand new. That that you have to get tax clearance, or you're responsible as a buyer for the seller's unpaid state taxes. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's so many nuances. And you said something interesting, which you're saying that's why this is the niche that you're in. And I was watching a video recently, and it was just talking about, it was a guy giving advice to someone on whether they should be more general in their business because they had all these ideas. They didn't want to be like boxed in, or should they niche down? And yeah, the example he used is, he said, okay, let's say you're having trouble in math and you want to hire a tutor. Do you want to hire a tutor that can do math, science, English, whatever? Or do you want to hire a tutor that all they do is math? They know it inside and out. And it's like, well, duh, of course, I'd want to hire the person that's the expert, that all they do is math. And it's the same analogy, in my opinion, from the legal perspective, and using someone like yourself who's a franchise attorney. But let's pivot in our conversation now to the infamous FDD and franchise agreement. Sure. So I have a couple of videos on my page that talks about kind of FDDs and things to look for and stuff like that. Of course, I'm not an attorney, but what are your thoughts on the FDD overall? Because you have some people that are buying big brands that, are they really going to negotiate? So what are your thoughts on people, getting counsel on an FDD?
So actually, the FDD is just a disclosure document that contains the franchise agreement within it. It contains all the contracts within it, or at least it's supposed to. It's required by federal law to have that. And it has 23 items of disclosure, which I'm sure you went through in your other formats on your page. And then it has a lot of other valuable information. Yes, I think it's very important to have counsel, even in a situation where the franchise agreement isn't negotiable at all. And most franchise systems, once they're established, and there is no definition of established. Everybody says, well, how do I know whether they're established or not? So for some, that's 50 franchisees in the system. For some, that's 100 franchisees in the system. It just depends on how they define the term themselves. But once they're established, they're not going to negotiate that franchise agreement at all because they're not hungry anymore. They're not hungry to get those first several franchisees in the system. When it's a brand new franchise, they're hungry. They want to have those first few because until they have them, they can't sell more. It's hard. It's really hard until they have those first few up and running. So they're hungry. They're willing to negotiate all kinds of things when it's one of the first in the system. Once you get to over 100, typically they aren't willing to negotiate much of anything unless you're buying multiple locations. If you're going to buy 20 locations of a brand, yeah, I think they'd negotiate even if it's an established brand. But if you're only looking at buying 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5, they're probably not going to negotiate if they're established. They may negotiate the development agreement, which is the agreement that says the timeline and other terms that define that development of those other locations. But they're not going to negotiate the franchise agreement. So what's the value in having the legal counsel? Very thing you said earlier. You don't know what you don't know. And that's so important. This is really a niche area. We've represented many, many, many lawyers over the years, as I said. And that's because they don't know what they don't know. They know even general business attorneys don't understand franchise law. They don't understand what they're looking at. They don't understand what's required or what they can do with that document. And a regular general business attorney is going to sit there and redline the whole document and blow the deal. So it's very important. This is a very important contract that any franchisee is going to live under for typically 5 to 10 or longer years. And understanding what the terms of that contract are and what it says, I think is very important and well worth the money.
Yeah, I agree. And what are there a couple of items in the FDD that you feel like stand out the most? And if so, like which ones are they?
Yeah, so I always tell the client to do 3 things. And this is in my initial consultation, which is free. They haven't retained me yet. This is just the first time we're talking. And I tell them 3 things that they should be doing. Number 1, in the FDD itself is a list of current and former franchisees with their contact information. It's an exhibit. And by the way, a table of contents to any FDD is somewhere between the 4th and 8th page in. It's not at the beginning. But look at that table of contents and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There are 23 items of disclosure that federal law requires be there. And then exhibits. One of the exhibits is going to be a current and former list, a list of current and former franchisees with their contact information. Call from that list because then you're getting the real perspective. It's not skewed to those that are just doing well or that are happy campers in the system. You're getting the real view. Secondly, and I provide any prospective client of mine with a list of my favorite top 10 questions to ask existing franchisees. I have a blog post and I just linked to that blog post from my website. And then as far as the sections, the items of the FDD itself, I think 5, 6, and 7 are the most critical. Those are for a franchisee to be looking at or a prospective franchisee. Those are the financial disclosures. Item 5 for those that are listening is the disclosure of the fees you'll pay initially, the upfront fees to the franchisor or its affiliates. Item 6 are the ongoing fees that a franchisee would pay to the franchisor or its affiliates. And item 7 is the chart that says what it's likely to cost to open up the business and operate it initially. In a chart, it's always set in a range. I always recommend to my clients to budget on the high end of the range so they're sufficiently funded, and to read the notes that accompany those 3 items. There are footnotes that accompany them. And it's very important they're really not in the foot though, just so you know, they're like right under the text, but very important to read through those because there's a lot of valuable information in those footnotes. I think it's also worth pointing out, and most people don't realize this, that item 7, which is the cost to open and operate initially, and item 19, which are the revenues that franchisees or corporate locations have experienced, are numbers that franchisor puts out. They're not audited by any governmental body. And so it's very important to verify those when you're making those phone calls to franchisees because we don't know if they're accurate or not accurate. And I can tell you, I don't litigate, but I follow litigation, and that those 2 areas are pretty hot areas of litigation in the franchise world. So that means that there's a lot of franchisors out there that are misrepresenting those numbers and that information. So it's very important to verify it. So when you're calling, make sure you ask questions. How much did it cost you to, especially brick and mortar businesses, how much did it cost you to open and operate initially? And what do your revenues and bottom line look like? And then the third thing that I tell my clients is to look at the financial health of the franchisor. As I said at the very beginning of this, I was in-house to a company, a huge franchisor that had been around for 20 years. that validated incredibly well because a lot of the franchisees made millions. It was a well-run, great company, and they went into bankruptcy. And that's when I lost my job that we talked about, and I started the first law firm. But all of those 1,300 franchise locations were owned by franchisees that lost their business through no fault of their own. So look at the financial health of the franchisor itself. They are in the exhibits. It says financial statements. It's an exhibit to item 21. So very important. It's almost always in an exhibit and not actually in item 21. So those three things I think are important to do when you're trying to validate any franchise system.
Yeah, super key. And you mentioned something interesting, which was that the list of all franchisees are in the FDD, and when we work with some of our clients, they'll say, "Yeah, the franchisor gave me this list of two people or three people to contact," and I'm like, "Well, just so you know, all of the franchisees are in the FDD, so you can call anyone who you want." Or, a common thing now is for franchisors to stick them on these group validation calls, which, look, from I get it. I mean, from a sales perspective, that's a great, smart thing to do, and from an efficiency standpoint as well. I mean, franchisees, I know what it's like being a franchisee and my phone blowing up with people who are trying to look at the franchise. And at some point, after, when I was even 3-4 years into my franchise, it was just like, yeah, I'm not calling some of those people back. Because, you're just busy running a business. So, but at the end of the day, you have the ability to go in there and call whoever you want. And people don't know that. It's crazy
I know.
to me.
And former franchisees. Now they're harder to get a hold of, especially if it's brick and mortar, because it's usually the store number, store phone number, and so they're not there anymore. But if you can get a hold of them, they're a great resource because they may not have been terminated or anything. They may have retired. They may have health issues that they sold the business. They may have sold the business and made a fortune and happy campers. But they're still a wonderful resource to tap into if you can get a hold of them.
Yeah, I agree. Great. Well, Nancy, I really enjoyed this conversation. Very fun and exciting. If people want to get a hold of you or your company, where can they do that?
So our website, which is my last name, so it's Lenard with all A's in it, LANARD. So it's Lenard and spelled out associates plural.com is the website. And you can text through the website. You can text me. You can call me. The number's on the website. Or you can email me. It's my first initial, N, Lenard at lenardandassociates.com. So any of those ways, feel free to get a hold of me, and I would look forward to that.
Awesome. And we'll put some links in the, if someone's watching on YouTube or if they're listening on the podcast platform, we'll put a couple of links in there as well. So great. Well, any parting advice or last words before we leave?
I think there's been kind of a theme through this whole thing, which is probably a good idea to retain counsel that's pretty experienced handling franchises and commercial leases. I think that was from the very beginning. We had that kind of trend going through this conversation. And I think that's pretty important. It is really, people don't necessarily see the value. They think they can do it on their own. They think they've negotiated all the business terms. The rest of it's boilerplate. And we all know now, hopefully, that is totally not true. That there are really, really important things that need to be checked that only a lawyer experienced in this world of franchising would really understand. And it's very important to retain good counsel.
I agree 100%. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nancy. It was a pleasure.
It was, Tariq. It was great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.